It was 1971, an exhibition at UCLA again, University of California, Los Angeles, Bernard Kessler, and he's said to be the first person to actually label this as fiber art. So again, it's absolutely the new sort of thing. And it is this kind of butch use of fiber, and it gradually comes into interiors in this way. And the bulk of these things have not survived. First of all, you can imagine, because they don't actually wear very well, some of them. The Stroud things do, but you know. And think of all these cushions. I mean, what's happened to all of these? Who knows? And those amazing rugs, those Raya type rugs. It was just a room became a giant teddy bear. Really, it was just all about this kind of texture. So I had to put that in just to remind us that there was age. This room had a Marimekko hanging on the wall. And next time we're talking about Sanderson, but I'm putting in the context of other things, so Marimekko will come to again a bit next time. But this change is summed up by these two images. They're different enough in date. The one on the right, excuse me, is 1963, this one. And the one on the left is Graham Smith, it's Warner's Africa, 1977. So here you can see the beginning of that sort of embrowned kind of thing. It's not as hairy and textural as it gets to be with the previous image, which was in the later 70s. And this kind of thing, let me see, Elizabeth Eaton, where is it? Edinburgh Weavers. But these kind, I mean, it has a different interest. I mean, this is what you did with all those modernist interiors with huge panes of glass. But these prints were called at the time engineered prints, and they were specially made so that the borders were absolutely calibrated for the furniture makers and fell at the edges of the cushions and the right place for the kick skirts and so on and so forth. At Warner's, they were called furniture prints because they made them over and over again, modifying, etc., for the furniture manufacturers, FMs, and they were sold only to them. And they went on and on and on with just changing in colors and so on. And all this brown furniture, etc. But the interesting thing I think about the comparison is that by the time you get to the 70s, especially the later 70s, these sort of patterns are evidently ethnographic, as opposed to just kind of slightly suggestive of it. They become much more obviously based on patterns that the average customer would appreciate as having an ethnographic origin. And it is part of all those people returning from the Peace Corps in America, which is a big market for these places. But also people just generally being, travel really does begin to be much more affordable by the time we get to the 70s, and that makes a difference. And in terms of travel, going back to Japan now, the contact between the West and Japan, of course, has been there, but it's important to remember that Japan was the enemy in the Second World War. And again, it took another generation to come along, if you like. There was a period, I can remember my uncle who fought out in Japan in the British Army, who was just infuriated that people were starting to buy Toyotas and things like that. He couldn't believe, he'd been imprisoned, and he couldn't believe. And so it does take time for these cultural memories to soften. And they begin to soften. As I say, the first, you saw that first image in 71 when that was really a breakthrough. But it begins really to be widely apparent again in the later 70s, and here are a bunch of examples. The fabric in the back is Katsuji Wakisaka, whom you won't have heard of probably, but he was a very influential designer. He designed for Waco International Fabrics, and he also designed for Marimekko. And Marimekko began, in fact, to use a lot of Japanese designers, and again, we'll revisit that. And the image in the center is from the Fabric Workshop in Philadelphia, set up specifically to marry artists with skilled hand printers, textile hand printers, and still going today. And these are a group of things that, again, are made by Japanese artists who were invited to Philadelphia to visit. And then this little tiny thing, this little tiny picture, because even at this scale you can see it's not really of a quality enough to see. But this is Issey Miyake in 1976, before various other things happened. But this is where he starts to have an impact. And he's using a traditional Japanese fabrics here, and of course he's quoting the kimono. And this pattern behind is, we'll see some in reality, it is of course